My name is Rosemary Ellsworth. I'm 72 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and for the past 5 years, I've lived alone in the same pale yellow house my late husband and I bought in our 30s. The house creaks more now, like it's trying to speak up for me, after decades of hearing everything and being able to say nothing. I never thought silence could be this loud. That Sunday morning, the sunlight was coming in gently through the kitchen window when I dialed my daughter Abby's number. I had just finished baking cinnamon rolls, her favorite, and I wanted to ask if I should bring them over. But more than that, I wanted to know if she and Joel had finally set the wedding date. They'd been engaged nearly a year. No announcements, no updates, just vague smiles and a few "we're keeping it simple" comments whenever I brought it up. The phone rang 3 times, then Joel picked up. Not Abby. Joel. "Good morning, Joel," I said, surprised. He didn't answer right away. I heard background noise, music, laughter, a glass clinking. I pictured them at brunch somewhere. Then his voice came through, casual, amused. "Oh, we tied the knot last weekend," he said, with a light chuckle. "Nothing fancy, just for real family." I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be polite, but because my brain had short-circuited, like someone had unplugged me from my own body. "Sorry?" I asked, not because I hadn't heard, but because I had. "Yeah," Joel continued, still chipper, still unbothered. "We did something intimate. Abby didn't want a big deal, just a courthouse thing. Her dad's cousin and my mom were there, very small." There was a pause, and then he added, as if it were a kindness, "Abby said you'd understand." Abby said I'd understand. I gripped the edge of the counter. The corner of a cinnamon roll flaked onto the floor. "Can I speak with Abby?" I managed. "She's napping," he said, his tone sliding just this side of mocking. "Long weekend?" "Sure." Then he hung up. "Just for real family." For the rest of that day, I sat on the front porch staring at the forsythia bushes I'd trimmed the day before, replaying those words. The birds chirped. A dog barked in the distance. A breeze rolled through. But I was inside some glass box now, one of those museum exhibits where people glance in and say, "What a quaint little life." I, who had raised Abby alone after her father died in a car accident when she was 10. I, who had paid her way through college, celebrated her first apartment with a brand new sofa set I couldn't afford, and spent every birthday since she turned 5, making a cake shaped like whatever animal she adored that year. Just for real family. And Joel had said it like it meant something noble, like I wasn't standing there in a house I'd built for her to come home to. 2 days later, I got a message from Joel. He had that same breezy confidence in his tone, but this time, there was a pinch of tension behind it. "Hey, Rosemary, just checking in. Looks like the mortgage payment hasn't gone through this month. Could you double-check that transfer? The bank's flagging it as overdue." I sat at my dining table, phone in hand, staring at the message. Then I smiled, and I typed back, "Oh, I thought you knew." If this story is already making you feel something, maybe anger, maybe recognition, maybe just a quiet ache you haven't named yet, then stay with me. Because what happened next isn't just about money or exclusion. It's about what happens when someone decides they won't be invisible anymore. And if you've ever been made to feel like a burden in your own family, I hope you'll hear something here that gives you the courage to stand a little taller, to take one step back toward your own voice. You're not too old. You're just on the edge of being free. Keep listening. The lavender dress was still hanging in the far right corner of my bedroom closet, wrapped in the plastic from the boutique, untouched. I had bought it 6 months ago, right after Abby mentioned they were considering a spring wedding. She'd made it sound offhanded, like it wasn't a big deal, but I knew my daughter. When she said things casually, it meant they mattered more than she was letting on. So I had driven to Holloway's downtown and spent 2 hours trying on dresses that didn't make me look like I was trying too hard or fading into the wallpaper. Lavender always reminded me of lilacs, and lilacs reminded me of my mother's garden in Indiana. It felt hopeful. The saleswoman had said the color made my eyes look softer. I had also bought a pair of nude heels I hadn't worn since the last parent-teacher conference 6 years ago. Those were still in the shoebox under the bed, along with a matching clutch purse and a handwritten card that said, "To Abby and Joel." May you always come home to kindness. I wrote that card a month ago, sealed it, and tucked it into the box with the gift. A quilt I'd started the day they got engaged. It wasn't perfect, but each square told a story. The floral one was from Abby's childhood bedroom curtains. The navy one was from Richard's old flannel shirt. A few were new fabric, ones I thought Abby would like. It was meant to be a symbol, something she could wrap around her marriage when the world felt too cold. Now it just felt heavy. I slid open the closet door and stood staring at the dress like it belonged to someone else. The plastic rustled when I reached out and touched it. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there and stared at the dress as if the answer to everything might be hidden in the stitching. Next to the closet, a large box sat on the floor labeled "For Wedding Day. Don't forget." The marker was fading. I had written it back when I thought I might be part of something, when I thought there would be a day to remember, not a weekend that passed without a word. Inside were items I'd collected for the celebration. A pair of champagne flutes, a framed photo of Abby and me on her high school graduation, a small cake knife I had polished the week before. I had even printed out an old recipe for lemon raspberry bars, planning to make them as a surprise dessert. Joel liked lemon, Abby had told me once. I sat down beside the box, ran my fingers along its edges, then slowly lifted the lid. The scent of cedar from the bottom of the closet wafted up. Everything inside was arranged so carefully, so purposefully, like the box itself was trying to hold its breath. Tucked under the photo frame was an envelope from the photographer I'd spoken to months ago, a gentle woman named Evelyn, who specialized in candid moments. She'd been so kind on the phone, saying she'd love to capture the mother of the bride moments, me helping Abby zip up her dress, holding her hand before the ceremony, wiping away tears during vows. Now there would be no photos. None of me, anyway. That night, after Joel's phone call, I had sat on the couch and, against my better judgment, scrolled through social media. I told myself I wouldn't do it, but I did. And there it was. A photo of Abby in a simple white dress, hair pulled back, makeup soft and glowing. She looked beautiful. My chest clenched so tightly I had to set the phone down. But what stopped me cold wasn't just the image of Abby. It was the one beside it. Joel was standing next to her, beaming. And to their left, smiling proudly, hand on Joel's shoulder, was a woman in a navy suit with a brooch I recognized from years ago. His mother, Mrs. Clarissa Masters. She had always carried herself like a woman who expected the world to apologize to her before she asked it for anything. She was holding the pen. Her signature, I would later find out, was one of the two on the marriage license. I wasn't just excluded. I had been replaced. My fingers trembled as I closed the box and stood up slowly. The lavender dress swayed on its hanger, the plastic sleeve catching the light from the bedroom window. I took it down carefully and laid it on the bed. Then I sat beside it, looking at it not as a future outfit, but as a relic of a role I'd been quietly dismissed from. The air in the room felt thick, or maybe I had finally stopped pretending to breathe normally. I thought about calling Abby, thought about asking why, but something told me I already knew. Joel didn't want me there. And Abby, she didn't fight him on it. Maybe it was easier that way. Maybe I'd made it too easy all along, always supportive, always available, always folding myself smaller so she could grow larger. I stood up, walked to the dresser, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was an old jewelry box Richard had given me on our 15th anniversary. I opened it and found the little silver locket Abby had given me when she was 9. Inside was a photo of the two of us, smiling, taken at the lake the summer before Richard died. I closed the box gently. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding that I had allowed myself to be edited out of my own life, that perhaps being the dependable one had quietly trained everyone to think I'd always be there, always nodding, always clapping from the sidelines. But not this time. I folded the lavender dress back into its bag. Then I opened the shoebox under the bed and took out the sealed envelope with the quilt and the card. I didn't open it. I just held it for a long moment. Then I stood, crossed the room, and placed the box in the hallway closet, behind the Christmas decorations. I needed space, not just in the house, in my life. And somewhere in the quiet between that realization and the sound of the hallway clock ticking forward, I finally let one tear fall. Just one. It was enough. The invitation came 2 days after I saw the wedding pictures. A simple text from Abby that read, "Dinner Friday, 6 p.m., just us 3. Hope you can come." No explanation, no apology, just a casual note, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been replaced by a woman who once told me at a Thanksgiving brunch that my cranberry sauce lacked backbone. But I went. I went because I needed to look into my daughter's eyes and ask myself whether she had truly erased me or just lost the courage to stand beside me. I went because I wasn't ready to stop being her mother. Not yet. Joel opened the door when I arrived. He smiled, too wide, too practiced, and stepped aside like a maitre d', welcoming an unimportant guest. His shirt was crisp, sleeves rolled just so, a glass of red wine already in hand. He gave off the air of someone rehearsed in performance, someone who read articles about posture and handshake firmness. "Rosemary," he said, using my full name as always. "Never Mom, not even once." "Joel," I replied with a nod, stepping inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a newlywed home. There were no flowers, no candles, no soft music playing in the background. Just the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen and the smell of something vaguely Italian. Abby's cooking, I assumed. She used to love inviting me to dinner, asking if I could bring fresh herbs from my garden or share one of Dad's old wine bottles from the cellar. Now, I walked past the coat rack and noticed a new umbrella stand where the old bookshelf used to be. Small changes, quiet erasures. Abby appeared from the kitchen wearing a soft blue blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked lovely. Tired, but lovely. Her eyes met mine for half a second before she turned to the stove. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, too brightly. "I made baked ziti. Joel's favorite." I caught the subtext. Not mine. Not ours. His. Joel gestured toward the dining table. "Sit, please. I opened a nice syrah. It's from Paso Robles. You'll like it." I sat at the edge of the chair, smoothing my skirt. The seat cushions were new, firmer than before. The old ones had been hand-sewn by me the summer Abby moved in. She said they made the house feel like home. I glanced around. Not one photo from her childhood. No hint of the girl who once made me macaroni art with number 1 Mom in glitter glue. It was as though Joel had curated the space to reflect only the present and the future. The past, it seemed, was inconvenient clutter. We ate mostly in silence. Abby offered small talk, comments about the weather, about the neighbor's dog who barked too much, about a new coffee shop downtown. I responded politely, asking a few questions here and there, but she never met my eyes for more than a flicker. Joel, on the other hand, was quite talkative. Too talkative. He asked about my garden, my part-time work at the library, even complimented the earrings I was wearing, an old pair Richard gave me on our 25th anniversary. It all felt like a performance, a display of civility to conceal what had already been decided. When we reached dessert, store-bought tiramisu on delicate ceramic plates, I finally looked directly at Abby. "You looked beautiful," I said gently. "In the photos." Her fork paused mid-air. Joel let out a little laugh, not unkind but dismissive. Abby set her fork down without eating. "Mom." I leaned forward, keeping my voice soft. "I'm not asking for an apology, sweetheart. I just want to understand." Joel leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "It was a very small ceremony," he said. "We didn't want drama, just something simple, intimate. Just for real family," I murmured. His eyes met mine over the rim of his glass. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a small smirk, so subtle it could have been mistaken for a twitch, and said, "Don't take it personally. It's a new chapter. For us." A new chapter. As if the old one had been written in pencil and he'd decided to erase every line that included me. Abby looked down at her plate. Her hands were clenched in her lap. She didn't defend him. She didn't defend me. The silence between us thickened into something unbearable. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said, rising slowly. "You don't want to stay for tea?" Abby asked quickly, finally looking at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She wasn't wearing mascara. "I think it's best I head home." Joel stood too, still performing. "Let us know if you need anything," he said with a polished smile. I met his gaze. "Likewise." Abby followed me to the door, lingering as I put on my coat. For a moment, it felt like she might reach out, might say something real. But she didn't. She just opened the door and let the night air rush in. "Drive safe," she whispered. I paused on the porch, turned to her one last time. I always do. Then I walked to my car, climbed in, and sat with my hands on the wheel, heart pounding louder than the engine. Inside, I had held my composure. But out here, in the cold quiet of the night, my vision blurred. Not from sadness, from clarity. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the laying of new boundaries, one plate at a time. 3 days after the dinner, I was pruning the lavender in my front garden when my phone buzzed with a notification. I wiped the dirt from my gloves, expecting maybe a forwarded cat video from Margaret down the street or another coupon from the bakery. Instead, it was an email. From Joel. Subject: mortgage transfer? No greeting. No punctuation in the body. Just a sentence, clipped and cool. Has the mortgage transfer been made? It's late. I stared at the screen. My fingers went cold despite the sun warming the back of my neck. I read it again, then a third time. There was no "Hi, Rosemary," no "Hope you're well," no "Thanks again for coming to dinner." Just a transactional nudge, like I was a forgetful employee behind on office paperwork. I didn't respond right away. I went inside, made tea I never drank, and sat in the bay window that faced the driveway. My home of 37 years. The house where Abby learned to ride a bike, where we buried Richard's favorite dog under the oak tree, where birthdays and heartbreaks and Sunday roasts had layered themselves into every creaking floorboard. And Joel wanted to know if the mortgage transfer had been made. It didn't make sense. This house was long paid off. Richard and I made our final payment the year Abby graduated high school. We even held a little ceremony, cut up the last payment slip, and had champagne in the backyard. I kept the original deed in a fireproof box, tucked beneath old tax returns and birth certificates. No bank owned this home. No bank should be waiting on anything. That night, I pulled the deed from the cabinet. It wasn't there. I emptied every file, checked again. Nothing. I remembered clearly the last time I'd seen it, 6 months ago, when Abby had come over to help me sort papers. I hadn't thought much of it then. She said she wanted to help organize, maybe get ahead of any paperwork I might need to update in case something ever happened. Her words had been soft, her eyes nervous. I'd felt touched, even grateful. Now my stomach curled. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. The woman at the front desk had short gray curls and bright pink lipstick that reminded me of the Avon catalogs my mother used to collect. She greeted me kindly, looked up my address, and then frowned as she tapped her keyboard again. "Looks like the deed was transferred 6 weeks ago," she said, "to an Abigail Ellsworth." My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the counter. I didn't authorize that." The woman gave me a sympathetic look. "You'll need to speak with the records supervisor. But yes, the property is now under her name, and it appears it's been listed as collateral on a new mortgage." I couldn't breathe. The walls of the office felt like they were inching inward, the fluorescent lights above humming louder than they should have. I asked her to print the documents. I sat in my car, hands shaking as I read through the paperwork. It was all there, my signature, notarized. But I never signed these. The notary's name was unfamiliar. The form was dated on a weekend I distinctly remembered. Abby had brought over chili, and Joel had stayed in the study, catching up on work. I remembered Abby asking me to sign a few papers that just needed Mom's confirmation for the trust transition and routine title clarification. I had signed what she gave me without reading closely. I thought it was to help her, to smooth things in case of emergency. She'd used words like future and security and simplify. I had wanted to believe I was helping. Instead, I had handed over the house. I drove home in silence, the folder burning hot in my passenger seat. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a delivery van parked across the street. A man was unloading flat-pack furniture. I stared at the crisp lawn, the hydrangeas I'd planted in spring, the curtains Abby had sewn as a teenager still hanging in the kitchen window. And I wondered, how much of this had been a plan? When did it begin? The next morning, I sent Joel a reply. Subject: mortgage transfer. Dear Joel, thanks for your email. I'm not sure why a mortgage is in question, as the house has been paid off for years. However, I discovered yesterday that the deed is now in Abby's name, with a loan against it. Since I was not aware of this, I'd appreciate clarity on how this came to be. Please don't mistake my silence for ignorance. Rosemary. I didn't hear back for 2 days. Then came a response. Brief, dry. Subject: mortgage transfer. Hi, Rosemary. Abby thought you'd be okay with it, considering your age and the fact that she'll inherit the house anyway. The loan is just to help us with a few upgrades. It's all in the family. That phrase again. In the family. The same family who excluded me from the wedding. The same family who smirked while serving me dinner on a table I once gifted them. The same family who now expected me to keep paying for a home I no longer legally owned. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I got up, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and studied my reflection. For years, I'd told myself I was doing things out of love, signing papers, giving space, staying quiet, being flexible. But love without boundaries had turned into a ledger with only one name in the debtor's column. They may have the papers, but I had time, and a memory that didn't forget. 4 days after Joel's last email, my landline rang. I was rearranging the tea tins in the kitchen cabinet, one of those quiet, idle morning tasks you do when the world outside feels far too loud. Earl Grey, peppermint, lemon verbena. I still bought Abby's favorite chamomile, even though she hadn't had tea in this house for months. The ringtone echoed through the stillness. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Rosemary? Hey, it's Joel. His voice was unusually upbeat, forced, like someone smiling through clenched teeth. Good morning, I said, placing the tin back in its place. Quick thing, he continued, breezy. Just wanted to check. Has the mortgage payment gone through? It was due last Friday, and I didn't see the transfer on the joint account. I blinked, letting silence stretch long enough that he added a nervous chuckle at the end. Did something go wrong with the bank, or? I turned to the window. The light was hitting the roses just right, pink and heavy with dew. I had pruned them last weekend. Their roots ran deep. I assumed Abby had taken care of it, I said lightly. Well, yeah, but you usually make the payment, he said, as though it were the most natural thing. It's how we've done it for over a year now. He wasn't wrong. I had transferred the money monthly, automatically, quietly, without fail. Even after they'd moved into the upstairs guest suite, even after the wedding that wasn't for me. I breathed in slowly. Joel, I said, my voice even, almost warm. Oh, I thought you knew. Knew what? That I stopped covering it 3 days ago, after I saw the deed. The line was silent. I could almost hear him blinking. I'm sorry, he stammered. You and Abby used my home to secure a mortgage, I said, still watching the roses, without telling me, without my consent. But, he started, then paused, recalibrating. Abby said you signed the paperwork. I did, without being told what it was. That's not consent, Joel, that's deception. Another silence. I could hear him shifting in his chair, or pacing. Maybe he was in their kitchen, the one I'd paid to remodel 3 years ago. Well, I mean, you knew we'd be taking over the house eventually. It's not like it's a surprise, and you've always been generous. You're right, I said, cutting in gently. I have always been generous. He took that as encouragement. Exactly. So this is just part of the transition. The payment helps both of us, and I figured, But you didn't ask, I said. You didn't include me in the decision. You took. Abby was under the impression that— No, Joel, I said softly. Abby wasn't under any impression. She made one, and you supported it. He was quiet again. I could hear the panic tightening in his breath now, the cracks forming behind his controlled tone. Well, the payment is due. So, are you saying you're just going to let it default? I let the silence bloom between us. Then I smiled, just faintly, as I repeated the words that had been forming in my chest since the moment I walked out of that records office. Oh? I thought you knew. His breath caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I let those 6 words hang in the air like the quiet chime of a wind bell after a storm. Because there are moments when restraint is not weakness. There are moments when silence is the sharpest blade. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I wasn't cushioning their decisions or translating their disrespect into something more palatable. I was simply holding up a mirror. And Joel, it seemed, didn't like what he saw. He hung up shortly after, muttering something about needing to check with Abby. I set the phone down gently and returned to my tea tins. Everything looked the same, but something had shifted. My hands no longer trembled when I reached for the kettle. My breath was steadier. The silence of the house no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. I made a cup of chamomile. Not for her. For me. It was Nora who knocked on my back door that Saturday morning, holding 2 mugs of black coffee and a face full of concern. I hadn't seen her since the roses bloomed, and I'd just been about to pull the weeds near the fence when her gentle tap brought me back indoors. "I figured you hadn't had breakfast," she said, as I let her in. "And you look like you could use a neighbor." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't eaten much since the wedding conversation, and my kitchen table had become a quiet battlefield of unopened mail and cooling cups of tea. We sat in silence for a moment, steam curling between us. She was the only person left who called me Rosie without asking first. "You've been on my mind," she said finally, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "I saw Joel's car in your driveway last week. He didn't wave." "He's not much for waving," I said, managing a half smile. She tilted her head, brows knitting. "Rosie, I don't want to overstep, but something's off." "You okay?" I could have brushed it off, could have smiled and changed the subject, but there was something in her voice that cracked open the shell I'd been building around myself. "I found out they used the house to refinance a mortgage," I said quietly, "without telling me, and I only discovered it when the payment went late." Nora's face went still, like a pond surface when the wind stops. "They what?" "They added my house as collateral, and I only realized it because Joel called asking why I hadn't transferred money to cover the payment." She leaned forward, eyes sharp now. "Have you checked the title?" "I assumed it was still in my name. I mean, it was always mine. Charles and I bought it after our 2nd anniversary, paid it off by the time Abby was born." "Rosie," she said, her voice a notch lower. "Assuming won't help you now. You need to check. People can be added to titles, especially with refinances." I looked down at the rim of my mug, suddenly remembering Joel's offhand comment weeks ago, something about needing me to sign a few papers for insurance purposes related to the property. I'd been making soup. I'd signed quickly. "You're saying Joel could have—" She nodded grimly. "People do it all the time. Add a name. Co-ownership. Makes it easier for banks to approve loans. But if you didn't know exactly what you were signing—" I swallowed. My fingers itched toward the drawer where I kept old records, though I knew whatever I had wouldn't include anything they'd done behind my back. "I'll go to the records office on Monday," I said, the words tasting heavy. Nora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Do it quietly. Don't let on. Just know what you're standing on." That night, I barely slept. I pulled out Charles's old filing box and sat with it on the floor, combing through mortgage histories, insurance letters, and old tax documents. Everything I touched had a memory tied to it. The first payment stub, our final check before the mortgage burned. The ink had faded, but I remembered every detail. 6 months ago. That's when the refinance must have happened. Abby had mentioned something vague then about exploring financial flexibility now that they were planning for the next phase. I hadn't questioned it. I'd been too focused on whether she'd let me help pick out flowers for the wedding. I thought about the way Joel avoided looking me in the eye lately, the way Abby suddenly forgot to mention updates about their life. I'd blamed it on stress, on wedding planning, but it was something else. By Monday morning, I was at the county recorder's office when the doors opened. The clerk was polite, a young woman with efficient fingers and a soft voice. I handed over the property address and waited. She returned in less than 10 minutes, carrying a folder that felt heavier than it looked. "You requested the current title and refinance documents?" I nodded. She slid the folder toward me and then paused. "You're Rosemary Ellsworth, correct?" "Yes." Her expression shifted ever so slightly, from neutral to something sympathetic. "I'll give you a moment." I opened the folder. There it was, clear as daylight. 6 months ago, Joel Andrews had been added as a co-owner of the property. The signature next to his name was mine, dated and notarized. He had walked into the bank with a document that bore my name and handed over the deed to the home where I'd raised my daughter, and I had helped him do it. Not knowingly, not willingly, but it didn't matter now. Joel Andrews legally owned half my house. I stared at the paper, my breath stuck somewhere between fury and shame. Nora had been right. I didn't know what I was standing on, but I would. Very soon. That evening, after Nora left and the title paper sat still and damning on my kitchen table, I walked down the narrow hallway to my bedroom, my steps as slow as if I were walking into a room I no longer owned. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I went straight for the bottom drawer of Charles's old writing desk, the one he'd used until his hands grew too shaky to write checks or sign letters. The drawer stuck halfway. It always had. I wiggled it loose with the heel of my palm and reached in, past the dusty envelopes and silver fountain pens he loved, until my fingers brushed the leather-bound folder. Maroon, worn at the corners. Our initials in gold leaf, still intact, C&R Ellsworth. I carried it to the bed, like it was holy. Charles had always said, "When in doubt, Rosie, check the documents. Love is for the heart. Land is for the lawyer." I used to laugh. Now, it just hurt how right he'd been. I unzipped the folder and opened it on my lap. There were layers of paper inside, each with a different weight, a different memory. The will, notarized in Oregon 2 years before his stroke. The trust agreement, a letter to Abby, another to me. And clipped inside the front pocket, a page marked Survivor's Control Clause, Property and Trust Assets. I remembered when he'd added that. We were in Bend, visiting his brother. Charles had just finished reading a book about generational wealth and estate planning, and he'd been quiet on the drive back. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with tea, he brought it up. "I want you to have full control, Rosie. Not just the house, everything, after I'm gone." "But I thought the trust already?" "It's joint now. We both signed off. But I want a clause that gives you final authority, just in case someone tries something later. I know how charming people can be when they smell opportunity." I remembered teasing him, "Planning for war, General Ellsworth?" He'd smiled, tired but proud. "Planning for your peace." That clause was there, right in front of me, signed by both of us. It granted the surviving spouse sole authority to override or veto any financial move involving trust-linked assets, including real estate, upon Charles's death. But at the bottom of the page, my heart caught. In order to activate the survivor's control, the surviving spouse must file a trustee transfer notice with the Ellsworth family trust attorney within 12 months of the decedent's death. 12 months. Charles had been gone 13. I stared at the sentence, reading it again and again, willing it to change, willing time to fold in on itself. But it didn't. I had missed the window by 1 month. 1 month. The pain hit like a stone underwater, not fast, not sharp, but steady, pulling me down with it. I closed the folder slowly, like putting a baby to sleep, and pressed it against my chest. I had been so wrapped in grief after Charles passed, planning the memorial, settling accounts, helping Abby through the loss of her father, that I hadn't thought to activate anything. We had trusted the structure would protect us, that signatures meant security, that trust meant safety. But legal structures don't weep at funerals. They don't remember what was said over tea. They don't understand promises whispered between pillows. They obey deadlines. I stood up, folder still in hand, and crossed to the mirror above my dresser. There I was, a widow, a mother, a woman who'd paid off her home, raised a daughter, kept the lights on, the cupboards full, the Christmas lights strung year after year. And yet, here I was, outmaneuvered by timing, by trust, by people who'd used that trust like a crowbar. I set the folder on the dresser and opened the second drawer, where I kept old photographs. I found one from the summer of '99, Charles and I in front of the rose trellis he built for our 25th anniversary. Abby was holding the hammer for him. Her face had dirt smudges and the brightest smile. That day she'd said, "I want to marry someone just like Dad." I traced her image with my fingertip. Somewhere between that photo and today, something had changed, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it. I replaced the photo and closed the drawer. The house was quiet. Not even the creak of pipes or hum of the refrigerator, just silence and the weight of what I now knew. I hadn't activated the clause. I hadn't protected the trust. And Joel, he hadn't wasted time stepping in to fill the space I left. But the story wasn't finished. Charles's voice echoed in my memory, calm and certain. "When in doubt, Rosie, check the documents." I had. And now I would check everything else. The office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the kind of place where old money met old law. I hadn't been to see Mr. Caldwell in over 5 years, not since Charles's stroke. We'd drafted updates to the estate plan then, making sure everything was in order, so I thought. He stood when I entered, a tall, thin man with spectacles too far down his nose and a gentleness in his eyes I hadn't expected. "Mrs. Ellsworth," he said, shaking my hand, "or may I call you Rosemary?" "You'd better," I smiled, trying to feel braver than I was. "I'm afraid I've come with a mess." He nodded, ushering me to the seat across from his desk. "That's usually when people come to lawyers. Let's take it piece by piece." I placed the maroon folder on his desk, opened it to the clause Charles and I had signed, and pointed to the sentence that had haunted me for nights now. "I missed the filing deadline by 1 month," I said. "The survivor's control clause." He scanned it carefully, the kind of careful that meant something, not just reading for the words, but for the spaces between them. "You're right," he murmured. "Technically, the deadline has passed, but not all is lost." That surprised me. He tapped the edge of the document. "This clause applies to direct control, but it doesn't remove your rights as a living trustee, and more importantly, it doesn't supersede existing codes in the Oregon trust law that allow a review of transfers under potential undue influence." "Undue influence?" I repeated. "Given your age, your status as surviving spouse, and the recent changes to the property title, if those occurred without clear, documented consent from you, and especially if financial gain was involved, we can open a formal review. That buys us time and leverage." I blinked, holding my breath for a second too long. "I thought I was stuck," I whispered, "that I'd lost everything Charles meant to leave to me." "You haven't," he said simply, "but we'll need to move smart. No drama, just documentation." I nodded slowly, and then I remembered something else. Something that had seemed strange at the time, but now gnawed at me with new clarity. "There was a call," I said. "Months ago, maybe 6. Someone from the Medicare Planning Division said they were updating eligibility files, wanted to send a form about mental capacity status in case I needed future assistance with estate transition. I thought it was odd, but I told them no thank you and hung up." Mr. Caldwell stiffened. "They asked to send a mental capacity form over the phone?" I nodded. He pushed his chair back slightly and reached for a file cabinet behind him. "That is not a standard outreach, not unless you requested it first." He pulled out a thick binder labeled Protective Fraud Cases, Seniors, and opened it. "This happens more than you'd believe," he said. "A relative, usually someone who stands to gain, pretends to be from a state agency. They offer a capacity evaluation, often under the guise of Medicare or Veterans Affairs. If the elder signs, they try to use it later to argue diminished capacity in financial matters. My hands curled slowly in my lap. Are you saying Joel? I'm saying we request the call records, Mr. Caldwell said, already scribbling on a legal pad. And we subpoena the number if necessary. If we prove misrepresentation, it discredits any financial agreement signed afterward, even if you had signed anything, which you didn't. I sat back in my chair, the air in my lungs suddenly cold. He never said a word, I whispered. He helped carry Charles's casket. He gave a eulogy about family loyalty. And then, behind closed doors, people grieve differently, Mr. Caldwell said carefully. But some people don't grieve at all. They just calculate. He handed me a list of documents. We'll need copies of your ID, tax filings for the past 2 years, utility bills in your name, and any bank statements that prove consistent residence and financial activity at the property. We'll also pull title history, loan documents, and trust distribution records. I reached for the list. And if Joel tries to contest? Then he does so publicly, Mr. Caldwell said, which means we request a court-appointed fiduciary audit. If he's confident he did nothing wrong, he won't object. But if he did, this is the last thing he wants. There was a strange peace in that. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening. I was documenting. I also want to draft a freeze notice, I added, on the property. I don't want him refinancing again or selling anything while this is pending. Smart, Caldwell said. I'll have the paperwork ready by Friday. We stood, and I felt taller than when I'd come in. At the door, he paused. One last thing. Has Joel ever discussed your health or decision-making with anyone? Has he asked for a conservatorship or financial oversight? No, I said, then paused. At least, not to me. He nodded solemnly. Then let's make sure he never gets the chance. I stepped out of the office and into the September sunlight, my bag heavier with papers, my chest lighter with purpose. Charles had built the house, but I would defend it. And this time, I would not miss a single deadline. I saw Nora again 2 days after my meeting with Mr. Caldwell. She was watering her potted lavender when I stepped out to collect the mail. Her wide-brimmed sun hat shaded her eyes, but her voice carried across the fence, low and cautious. Rosemary, do you have a minute? I nodded and walked over, mail forgotten in my hand. She didn't beat around the bush. I was talking to Lou, my cousin from the bank. I didn't say anything specific, but I mentioned how strange it was, the way Joel and Abby had been maneuvering. Again, I stayed silent, letting her go on. He said something odd about an account that Abby's mother co-signed on, a savings fund that had large deposits every other month starting last year. Apparently, Joel set it up, said it was for unexpected medical expenses. But Lou thought it was unusual because the source account had your name on it. My heart gave a strange kick. My account? I asked. Nora nodded. It looks like the money was transferred into the savings, then moved again, all under family care withdrawals. But here's the thing. Lou checked the address on the transfers. It was your home address, listed as the origin point. Not Joel's, not Abby's, yours. A quiet nausea settled in my stomach. I'd always trusted my online banking notifications, but Joel had once insisted I let him help automate some of my payments. Less stress for you, Mom, he'd said. We'll set up monthly reminders. I never thought to ask what else he connected. I went inside, closed the blinds, and sat down at the dining table with my laptop. I opened my checking account and scrolled back 6 months, then 9. There they were, transfers labeled Care Fund and Medical Support. Some were $400, others over $1,200. Always to the same routing number. I copied the number, then opened my messages with Abby. I searched the digits and found it, listed once in a text she sent nearly a year ago when I offered to help her cover physical therapy after her ankle surgery. This is the savings account Mom helped me open, just in case, she'd written. Joel said it's better than Venmo. So that account still existed. But the text hadn't aged well. Abby's recovery had ended months ago. She was back at the yoga studio teaching 3 times a week. There were no ongoing medical bills, none that I'd been told about. And yet the transfers had continued. I called my bank's fraud line. The representative confirmed the setup. Recurring transfers linked to my account, authorized under the guise of shared family management. "Is there any document that shows I signed for this?" I asked. "No, ma'am," she replied. "We show a verbal authorization logged from your number." The representative noted a male voice confirmed identity by last 4 digits of Social Security. I froze. Joel knew that number. He'd helped file Charles's life insurance paperwork. He even kept a copy of my ID, just in case, he'd said after the funeral. I asked for a full transaction history to be emailed. Then I stared at my screen and felt the bile rise. Slow, deliberate, disguised as kindness. That was how it always started, with the soft poisoning of boundaries, wrapped in concern. A week after Charles died, Joel had brought over a folder of resources. "You might want to set up some estate backups," he'd said, "in case the hospital bills come through late." He'd been gentle, efficient, almost touching in his attentiveness. Now I saw it for what it was, conditioning. Each helpful gesture had paved the way for silence, for my compliance, for invisibility. He hadn't needed me to sign anything dramatic, just small permissions, little nods, one transfer at a time. When I finally confronted Abby, I chose the quietest moment possible. She had dropped by to return a mixing bowl. I invited her in, offered tea, and opened my laptop without a word. I turned the screen toward her. "I'd like you to look at this," I said. Her eyes scanned the list. Her face changed, barely, but enough. "I didn't know it was still connected," she said softly. "Did you know Joel was using my Social Security information?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "He said you'd agreed, that it was mutual." "Did I ever speak to you about transferring over $9,000 in less than 10 months? No. So where did the money go?" She looked away. "Some to the studio, some to our mortgage, and some to my mom, for her treatments." "Treatments?" "She's been going through back surgery consults. Insurance didn't cover it all." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "We never meant to hurt you. Joel said you were part of it." I stared at her. "You wanted to build a life, Abby, and I wanted to help, but not like this, not without honesty." "I'll talk to him," she whispered. "We'll return it." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "You won't. I've already opened a formal case. The bank will handle it now." She looked stunned. Not angry, just small. The kind of small I'd once felt when Charles's diagnosis came and no one knew what to say. Except this time I knew exactly what to say. "This isn't about the money, Abby," I said. "It's about the erosion, the kind that starts with one borrowed dollar and ends with stolen trust." She stood to leave, her eyes glossy. "I did love you like a daughter," I added, "and I hope someday you understand why I had to stop pretending." When the door closed behind her, I sat down in the stillness. My account was lighter, but I, finally, was not. I had just settled into the sunroom with a cup of peppermint tea when the chime rang at the front door. Through the leaded glass, I saw a familiar silhouette, poised, upright, tailored in beige and pearls. My heart gave a small lurch. It was Mrs. Pierce, Joel's mother. We hadn't seen each other since Charles's memorial, not once during the planning of the wedding or the so-called celebration that never included me. And yet there she stood, gloves on, a small tin of almond cookies tucked neatly under one arm like we were old bridge partners. "Rosemary," she said, lips curved into a soft, restrained smile. "I was just driving through and thought I'd stop in. We haven't spoken in ages." I stepped aside and nodded. "Come in." She moved with the precision of someone who practiced grace for sport. Her eyes scanned the foyer, then the hallway, pausing just a beat too long on the family photo that no longer included Charles. Only me, Abby, and Joel, taken 2 Thanksgivings ago. She said nothing. We sat in the living room. She declined tea, offered me a cookie. I declined it. She folded her hands in her lap. "How have you been? The transition must feel surreal." I tilted my head. "Which transition is that? Widowhood or watching my daughter get married without so much as a text?" Her smile held. "I meant adjusting to the quiet. Empty houses can echo." I gave no answer. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if discussing matters of state. "You know, Rosemary, I've always respected your composure, especially after Charles passed. You handled the estate details with dignity. That's not always easy, especially for women our age. So many let emotions cloud their decisions." I met her eyes, calm and unreadable. "Is that what brings you here? Estate details?" She let out a soft laugh, smoothing the crease of her slacks. "Well, in part. I received some notifications. Routine, of course. As co-trustee on a few of Charles's accounts, I still receive access to certain filings, old titles, property records, things of that nature." I said nothing, waiting. She continued, "It appears that the refinance paperwork on this house was processed through a bundle, one that included a clause tying Joel into partial ownership. Just a fraction, of course, but still binding." There it was, the real visit. I set down my teacup. "Joel," I said slowly, "was never part of the original deed. And Charles never authorized any such clause. You and I both know that." She lifted her brows with a delicate shrug. "Intent can be murky, especially when grief enters the equation. I'm not saying anything was done improperly, of course. But from a practical standpoint, things are shifting." My fingers rested on the edge of the armrest. She leaned in just a little more. "And with Abby being his wife now, you can imagine how confusing it might be for them if decisions are delayed. They're trying to build a life, Rosemary. A home, a future." I stared at her. She added, "Joel mentioned they were willing to take over some responsibilities, lighten your load, especially now that things like upkeep, taxes, repairs, well, they can pile up." "And who would hold the title?" I asked. Her tone didn't waver. "Technically, it wouldn't need to change immediately, but a formal transition would ensure clarity for everyone involved." A pause passed between us, thick as fog. Then she smiled again. "It's not about taking anything from you, dear. It's about preparing, ensuring that Abby doesn't face unnecessary obstacles when the time comes." "When what time comes?" She blinked, then softened her voice. "Let's not pretend we're immortal. None of us are. Charles had the foresight to name you as his primary, yes, but long-term continuity, that's something else entirely." I stood up. She remained seated, perfectly composed. "Let me be very clear, Diane," I said. "This house was built on my husband's labor and my devotion. Joel did not inherit it. He circumvented a legal pathway with deception. And Abby, she's not a victim in this." Mrs. Pierce finally rose, adjusting her coat sleeve. "You're entitled to your perspective. And I'm entitled to my home." There was a flicker then, just a glint in her eyes. A quiet warning. "You're a thoughtful woman, Rosemary. I only hope that when the time comes to sign what needs to be signed, you'll do so with grace. For Abby's sake." I walked her to the door. Just before she stepped outside, she paused. "I've always admired your poise," she said. "It would be a shame to see it hardened by bitterness." I opened the door. Better bitter than blind. She stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking against the stone. She didn't look back. When the door closed, I didn't move for several minutes. I simply stood in the foyer, staring at the cookies she left behind. Almond, Charles's favorite. Not mine. I threw them straight into the trash. The day after Diane Pierce left my doorstep with her tin of stale sweetness and veiled threats, I made my list. It was a short list, but every item on it had sharp teeth. The locksmith came first. A man named Dennis, mid-50s, kind eyes, no questions asked. I walked him through every door, front, side, sunroom, garage, and told him plainly, "Change everything. Deadbolts, too, and add one to the basement just in case. He didn't blink. Good choice, ma'am. Old locks are like open secrets. By sundown, every key in the house was mine. Abby and Joel still had their copies, old ones. Let them try those next time they came. Let them jiggle the knob and feel the cold click of rejection. Then came the cameras, discreet, wireless, cloud-based. One above the garage, two at the side gates, one at the front entry. Another inside, tucked above the bookshelf facing the living room. I placed it there after finding out that Joel had entered once without knocking, claiming he'd left something in the garage months back. I hadn't questioned it then. Now I questioned everything. That night, I opened a new checking account under my own name at a small regional bank, one Joel wouldn't think to search. I moved all recurring deposits there, Social Security, pension, and Charles's remaining investment yields. I made sure not a cent of it bled into the joint account Abby once had access to, the one I had set up in the hopeful days when she first called me Mom. Hope is a dangerous thing when it's placed in the wrong hands. Then, the documents. I took out the thick folder from Charles's cabinet, blue leather, gold lettering, the seal from the estate attorney's office embossed at the corner. I flipped through every page. The living trust, power of attorney, survivorship clause, ownership titles. Then I made copies, color, front and back, and stored them in 3 places, one in my fireproof safe, one in a lockbox at the bank, and one with Mr. Caldwell's office. I asked Mr. Caldwell to update all signatures, replace Charles's old authorizations with mine, remove co-trustees, transfer all remaining authority to me as surviving spouse. He nodded without fanfare, but his eyes carried respect. I didn't need sympathy. I needed certainty. I want it ironclad, I told him, so if someone tries to slide a paper under my hand, I'll know which hand to slap away. Understood, he said, and he did exactly that. At home, I pulled out every file folder from the armoire in the guest room, financial statements, receipts, loan confirmations, notarized letters. I color-coded each one, labeled them by year and relevance. I shredded duplicates and saved digital copies on a USB drive I wore around my neck under my blouse. Abby once teased me about my habit of keeping paper records, said everything should be on an app. I smiled back then. I don't smile about it now. On day 4, I went into the attic. The same attic where Charles used to keep old tax boxes and hunting gear he hadn't touched since his knees gave out. In the corner was the antique steamer trunk my mother had brought from Ohio in the 1940s. I opened it and placed 2 things inside, the original trust documents and the first letter Charles ever wrote me in college when he asked if I wanted to skip town and start a life with someone who had dreams bigger than his wallet. I placed them beneath the quilt and locked the trunk. Not everything needed to be easy to find. In the evenings, I walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight and my phone. I checked the camera feeds. I took mental notes of tire tracks, moved flower pots, shifted garden stones. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The difference is power. I started speaking with Nora daily. She brought coffee most mornings and pie on Saturdays. We talked about her late husband, about Abby when she was still a teenager helping at the church pantry, about how little things could bloom into bigger things when you looked away too long. Don't ever underestimate your calm, Nora told me once, sipping her brew. It unsettles people who thrive on noise. I liked that. It stuck. Each step I took I did in silence. No declarations. No revenge speeches. Just preparation. Just stewardship of my own life. They thought they'd caught me in fog, but I'd always known the layout of this house better than anyone. I knew where the shadows fell and which creaks meant wind or something else. I knew which drawers stuck when it rained and where Charles used to stash old silver in case we had unexpected guests. Now I was the unexpected guest in their plans. I whispered something to myself one night as I locked the back gate. The wind had picked up and I could smell the pine from the woods beyond the yard. The only door they could walk through is the one I leave open, and I wasn't leaving anything open anymore. The first message came on a Wednesday morning, just after I finished watering the hydrangeas. Hi, Rosemary. Just wondering if we could talk. I think there's been a lot of miscommunication, and I really want to clear the air. It's important, for all of us. There was no mom, not even a, "Hi, it's Abby." I stared at the screen for a few seconds before locking the phone and slipping it into my apron pocket. I finished tending to the hydrangeas. They had always bloomed better when I didn't rush. The second message arrived an hour later. "I know you're busy. I feel like things got off track. Joel and I both feel it. We never meant for you to feel left out." Still no apology, just soft words wrapped in gauze, meant to muffle rather than mend. By mid-afternoon, there were 5 messages. One had a photo attached, an old picture of Abby and me at the lake, the summer before her engagement. I remember I had packed her sandwiches with the crusts cut off, the way she liked, though she never thanked me for them. She had hugged me in the water, laughing. The caption under the photo now read, "I miss this." I didn't reply. I just saved the picture into a folder on my phone labeled Before. The messages didn't stop. They came in bursts, morning check-ins, midday reflections, late-night regrets that still tiptoed carefully around accountability. "I know things haven't been perfect," one read, "but can we try again? Joel's been under so much pressure lately." That line caught me. I opened my laptop and logged into one of the real estate listing sites I'd bookmarked. I typed in Joel's name. The second property on the list had a big red banner across the image, "Pending foreclosure." It was a condo downtown they had tried to flip. High ceilings, minimalist staging, overpriced. I kept reading. The same property was listed under a shell company tied to Joel's name. There was another, an empty lot near the lake, no permits filed, no buyers, just debt. 2 clicks later, I found a business news alert. Joel had been one of 4 names listed in a small venture capital group that had just gone under. "High risk, high yield," the article said. But in this case, all risk, no yield. And Abby? A quick search through LinkedIn showed her profile had been updated to freelance consultant, a euphemism these days for recently let go. Ciao. The 7th message came just as I closed my laptop. "I know things are tense, but we love you. You mean a lot to both of us. I think if we could just sit down, face to face, maybe over dinner. I know Joel would be happy to see you again." Happy to see me? After siphoning my name off property titles, rerouting funds into accounts I never touched, rewriting the story of our family in paperwork filed behind my back? I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone loosely in my hand. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, I imagined replying. Just a line, maybe even a question, something to give them a thread of hope. But instead, I clicked delete. One by one, each message disappeared. Soft tones from the phone as I erased them. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. I didn't owe them access to my peace. The last message was short. Just one line. "We heard from Diane you've been keeping to yourself. Joel says he's worried." I looked out the window at the dusk light spilling across the lawn, the same lawn they used to run across when they visited, barefoot, tossing keys on the kitchen counter without asking, as if the house were already theirs. I got up, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat in the reading chair by the fireplace. I hadn't kept to myself. I had kept myself safe. That's a very different thing. Let them wonder what I was doing now. Let them sit in their silence and call it confusion. I wasn't disappearing. I was becoming visible again, just in places they never bothered to look. That night, I wrote a note to myself on a yellow sticky pad and placed it on the fridge. "They only text when they think you've forgotten." And I hadn't forgotten a single thing. It was a Friday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone, not the mail carrier, not Nora, not a neighbor selling school raffle tickets. I opened the door and found a man in a beige blazer, carrying a leather folio, and smiling in that way people do when they expect compliance. "Mrs. Ellsworth?" he asked, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Yes?" I kept my hand on the latch, only partially opening the door. "I'm Dr. Brandon Keel. I'm a licensed psychological evaluator. I'm here for a wellness check-in." I blinked, not moving. "I didn't request one." No, of course not," he said quickly. "This is just a routine screening. Your family expressed some concerns recently. Nothing alarming, just a standard cognitive wellness protocol for seniors. I promise this won't take long." He smiled again, too warmly, the kind of smile people put on when they're paid to disarm you. I looked at his folio. A stack of pre-filled forms peeked out. Not a clipboard, not a pen ready to take notes from my answers, just pre-written assumptions dressed as paperwork. "Who sent you?" I asked. He gave a well-practiced shrug. "I work with several family legal representatives. It's all confidential, of course." I opened the door a little wider, but not to let him in, just enough to slip my phone into my pocket and hit record. I'd prepared for this. I invited him inside, offering him the armchair by the bay window, the one Abby once curled into to read magazines. I sat across from him, notepad in hand. "You don't mind if I take notes, do you?" I asked. He gave a polite chuckle. "Of course not, but this really is informal." He began with simple questions. "Do you remember what day it is? Who's the current president? Have you found yourself forgetting people's names lately?" I answered clearly, deliberately, my tone neutral. I gave him nothing to work with. He flipped to a new page. "Can you tell me about your current living situation?" I tilted my head. "In what sense? Are you living alone by choice? Do you feel safe managing your finances? Are you receiving assistance for meals, appointments, that sort of thing?" The questions were phrased as concern, but the subtext was legal ammunition, words that could be twisted, snipped, and presented out of context in a courtroom, if I let them. "I do my own grocery shopping, pay my bills on time, and file my taxes by hand," I said. "Do you need me to retrieve my last 3 utility statements?" He smiled again, thinner this time. I continued. "While we're at it, would you like a copy of my latest blood panel or the real estate filings I reviewed just this week?" He adjusted his collar. I leaned forward. "Dr. Keel, let's not pretend you showed up out of the blue. Someone sent you. And I'm willing to guess, based on the nature of your check-in, that you're billing either Joel or his legal counsel, which means this is not a wellness check. This is an evaluation attempt, possibly even a pretext for guardianship proceedings." He hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to—" "I didn't ask for confirmation," I said gently, "but I did record this conversation from the moment you identified yourself at the door, including your acknowledgement that I didn't request your services." His face dropped, just enough for the performance to falter. "I'll be forwarding the recording," I continued, "to Mr. Caldwell, my attorney, and to the state board that governs ethics for psychological assessments in cases involving elder care. If I find your name associated with any report that questions my capacity, I will request a formal investigation into your licensing and your relationship with my son-in-law." He stood up, clearing his throat. "There's no need to escalate." "There's no need to stay," I said calmly. "The door's right behind you." He opened his mouth again, perhaps to salvage his script, but I was already standing. He left quietly. I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat back down and opened my laptop. The recording transferred smoothly. I included a short note to Mr. Caldwell, attaching the audio file and a bullet-point summary of the interaction. I also blind copied Nora, who had worked for 30 years in family mediation and once told me, "Any visit not agreed to in writing is an ambush." The next morning I received an email from Mr. Caldwell. "Received. You handled this perfectly. I'll begin the formal documentation trail today." I exhaled, not from fear, but release. I had feared for my peace, for my memory, for the parts of myself that might be questioned, chipped at, erased, but not anymore. If they wanted to wage war in silence, so be it. I had learned how to be silent too, except my silence was full of documentation, backup, dates, and receipts. They had underestimated the wrong woman. That afternoon, I added another note to my kitchen wall, beside the yellow one about forgotten texts. This one read, "Smile politely, record everything." The envelope came by certified mail, thick, heavy. My name typed in stiff uppercase, a return address I didn't recognize. I signed for it, thanked the courier, and closed the door gently behind me. The weight in my hands told me it wasn't a birthday card or a notice from the library. I opened it at the kitchen counter, where the morning light caught the fine print and made it feel colder than it already was. Petition for guardianship, it began. The petitioner, Joel Pierce. I read the pages slowly, methodically, as though it were someone else's name typed on the lines. Someone else whose competence had been questioned, whose signature was now a point of legal contention. He had claimed I was no longer able to manage financial responsibilities and potentially vulnerable to self-neglect. And there were suggestions, carefully worded, just vague enough to slip through, that I'd been confused about mortgage documents, that I no longer maintained clear records, and that I had exhibited signs of cognitive decline in recent months. It was clinical, sanitized, as though my life were a misfiled account that needed administrative correction. He didn't even sign it with a personal note, just Joel E. Pierce, with an address I'd once helped pay the down payment on. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the clock tick behind me, while my tea went cold and the birds outside chirped into the silence. Then I walked into the study, opened my legal folder, and pulled out the small USB drive Mr. Caldwell had given me. I plugged it in. Labeled cleanly at the top of the list was the audio file. April 14, living room WAVE. I clicked play. Joel's voice filled the room, clear, unhurried. Recorded from my purse during a visit 2 months ago, when he thought I was dozing off in the rocker while he whispered with Abby in the hallway. "Once the house is ours," he said, "we can take care of the rest." Abby's voice was muffled but audible. "Are you sure she won't push back?" Joel had laughed, low and short. "She's already signed half the stuff. She thinks it's for insurance. She's slow now. Just don't spook her." The rest was even worse, but I didn't need more than that. I printed the transcript, clipped it to a letter from Caldwell, and added it to the formal response to petition we'd been preparing, because we had known this was coming. The unannounced mental health evaluation hadn't been a one-off. It had been a probe. They were testing how far they could push. By the time I arrived at Caldwell's office, the documents were already being copied and collated. His assistant handed me a fresh folder, marked Emergency Motion to Dismiss, and nodded with quiet respect. At the courthouse, I sat silently beside Caldwell as Joel walked in, pressed suit and too much cologne. He avoided my eyes. Abby was not with him. When the judge asked if there was any supplemental evidence to review before the hearing began, Caldwell stood calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. We request the court listen to a brief audio excerpt relevant to the petitioner's stated motives." He pressed play. Joel's voice echoed through the courtroom, confident, self-assured, a man who thought no one was listening. "Once the house is ours." It was all we needed. The judge's expression didn't shift, but the clerk paused in her typing. Joel fidgeted in his chair, suddenly smaller. When it ended, Caldwell handed over the transcript and our written rebuttal, citing my financial records, physician letters, property documents, and a notarized statement from Nora confirming I'd maintained my daily life independently. The judge cleared his throat. "Unless the petitioner wishes to provide a compelling counter-narrative," he said, "I believe we have enough here to determine both motive and capacity." Joel tried to speak, but the words came out half-formed. It was a misunderstanding." The judge held up a hand. "This is not a custody dispute, Mr. Pierce. This is an attempt to strip legal agency from a fully competent adult. A grave matter, and one I take seriously." He turned to me. "Mrs. Ellsworth, do you feel safe in your current residence?" I met his eyes. "I do now." He nodded. "Petition denied with prejudice. And I strongly advise all parties involved to consider the weight of false claims when pursuing court action in the future." It was over in 20 minutes, but it had been building for months. Outside the courthouse, Joel caught up to me. His tone was low, urgent, but without the mask this time. "You didn't have to make it public," he hissed. "That recording—" I looked at him, not angry, not afraid, just done. "You didn't have to file that petition," I replied, "but you did." He stepped back, blinking. I turned and walked toward the parking lot, not rushing, not triumphant, just steady. Some things, once revealed, can't be hidden again, and some people, once seen clearly, can't be unseen. Joel had wanted control. What he gave me instead was clarity. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Sterile, high ceilings, polished wood that gleamed under fluorescent lights. I had never been inside one before, not for anything personal. The air had a faint scent of old paper and varnish, like everything in the room had waited years just to be read into record. Mr. Caldwell sat beside me, his legal pad open, glasses low on his nose. He whispered, "Just breathe like it's another morning in your garden." I smiled at that. My hands rested on the table, steady, not clenched. Every document was already filed, every motion submitted. I was here not to defend myself, but to affirm the truth. Joel sat across the aisle. His suit was darker than last time, his jaw clenched in a practiced grimace. Beside him, Abby looked small in her chair, eyes downcast. She hadn't returned my calls or messages in weeks, but she was here. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise." The judge entered, robe flowing, expression unreadable. He looked down at the docket, then at the counsel tables. "This is the matter of guardianship concerning Mrs. Rosemary Ellsworth, respondent. Petitioner, Mr. Joel Pierce." He looked up. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand you have opening remarks?" Caldwell stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We intend to demonstrate not only the full capacity of Mrs. Ellsworth, but also a disturbing pattern of financial coercion by the petitioner." He turned slightly toward Joel. "Our argument is not simply that Mrs. Ellsworth is competent. It is that she has been preyed upon, with calculated intent, by those who benefit from her perceived silence." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Very well. Proceed." We began with the basics. Medical letters from 2 doctors, one of them my longtime physician, confirming my cognitive health. Then came bank statements, showing I'd been handling my own finances without error. My utility bills, paid, grocery deliveries, scheduled and budgeted, notes from my volunteer work at the community center, even the statement from Nora, notarized and succinct. She walks a mile each morning, she attends the neighborhood book club, and last month she fixed my garden hose better than my husband ever could. The courtroom chuckled lightly. Joel didn't. Then came the recordings. The judge listened as Joel's voice played through the speakers again. "Once the house is ours." The judge didn't blink. Caldwell didn't need to elaborate. Then I stood. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the judge offered me the chance, I took it. "Your Honor," I said, my voice firm but unhurried, "I'm not here because I failed to manage my life. I'm here because I dared to protect it. I may be a widow, I may be 71, but I know what a signature means, and I know when someone's trying to take something that doesn't belong to them." Joel shifted in his seat. Abby looked up briefly, then back down again. The judge asked, "Would you like to respond to these statements, Mr. Pierce?" Joel rose, smoothing his jacket. "Your Honor, I only filed this petition out of concern. Rosemary's been forgetful. There were missed calls, confused messages." He pulled out a few sheets. "She once called me 3 times in a row to ask about her own bank account. I feared elder decline." "Was it the same day she transferred a $14,000 check to pay for your wife's surgery?" Caldwell asked calmly, not looking up. Joel flushed. "She offered. We were family." "Yet you filed for full legal guardianship over that family." The judge leaned forward. "Let's not speak in circles. Mr. Pierce, did you inform Mrs. Ellsworth before transferring the deed of her home?" Joel hesitated. "We discussed it." "And did you receive her explicit consent in writing, separate from bundled paperwork?" Silence. Abby stirred. The judge noticed. "Mrs. Pierce, do you wish to speak?" She blinked. Everyone turned. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to say something." Joel turned sharply toward her. "Abby." She didn't look at him. "I didn't know everything at first," she began. "I thought the forms were for refinancing. Joel told me his mother wanted to help with our mortgage, that it was her gift to us." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. But then things kept changing. The house went under both our names. Joel started saying it was only fair since he was helping with finances, but it was always her money. She glanced at me. Her eyes were glassy, but sincere. I was scared. He said if I didn't back him, I'd lose everything too. He kept telling me she wouldn't remember, wouldn't notice. I believed him, but I see now. I was wrong. The judge tapped his pen. Are you saying you were coerced into participating in a fraudulent transfer of ownership? Abby nodded. Yes, and I want to withdraw my name from the petition. I never wanted this. Joel's chair scraped sharply as he stood. Abby, what are you doing? But she didn't flinch. She looked at the judge. I'm sorry. I should have come forward sooner. The judge folded his hands. Mrs. Pierce, your statement is entered into record. This court thanks you. He turned to Joel. I see no further need for deliberation. Then, looking directly at me, the corners of his mouth lifted just slightly. Mrs. Ellsworth, you are not only mentally sound, you are legally unbreakable. The words landed not like a verdict, but a release. My shoulders softened. My breath came easier. It wasn't just a dismissal of Joel's claims. It was the restoration of my name. Joel stormed out before the session was officially closed. Abby lingered behind, walking toward me with hesitation. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quietly, but I wanted you to know I never meant to hurt you. I didn't say anything for a moment. I studied her face, the girl I once held in my kitchen, the daughter-in-law I once prayed would become family, not a stranger. You didn't have to be like him, I said gently. But I'm glad at least that today you weren't. She nodded, then left. Mr. Caldwell and I walked out into the sunshine. It was mid-afternoon. The courthouse steps felt steep, but my steps didn't falter. You did more than win a case today, he said as we reached the sidewalk. You made sure your silence would never be mistaken for weakness again. I looked up at the sky. It was cloudless. There are moments in life when the air feels different, not just lighter, but clearer. When the burden isn't gone, but it's yours again, chosen, held, protected. That day, I didn't just reclaim my house. I reclaimed my voice. The last box I packed was the smallest one. Inside it, I placed a photo of Harold, our wedding rings tied together with blue ribbon, and a single yellow rose from the bush he planted for our anniversary 30 years ago. I clipped it that morning. Soft petals, a stem full of stubborn thorns, blooming even though fall had already settled in. Some things just choose to survive. The moving truck rumbled down the road hours later, and I watched from the porch one last time as it disappeared behind the curve. The old house stood quiet behind me, no longer mine, but no longer theirs either. It had served its season. It had carried the memories, the betrayals, the awakenings. But I didn't belong to it anymore. I had outgrown that soil. My new place was smaller, tucked on the edge of town where the sun hit the windows at just the right angle every morning. It came with a tiny garden patch, overrun with wild mint and crabgrass, but I saw potential. I rolled up my sleeves and started digging that first afternoon, blistering my hands, smiling the entire time. I didn't want a fresh start. I wanted a conscious one. The first thing I did was close every joint account still lingering under old names. I opened my own, named under no one but me. I sat with Mr. Caldwell one last time and signed final amendments ensuring that no future claim, by Joel or anyone, could ever be revived. Everything had been locked, every gate sealed. What I gave, from here on, would be mine to give freely. The second thing I did was call Nora. She was the one who told me I wasn't losing my mind when everything around me was designed to make me question it. She answered on the first ring. Well, are you ready to visit the botanical gardens or what? She laughed. I thought you'd never ask, I replied, lacing up my sneakers. We walked among peonies and fountains, benches tucked under the shade of old oak trees. We talked about grief, about being 70 and still being underestimated. And we talked about Harold, how he would have loved seeing me in this next chapter. I told her about the letter he left behind in one of the legal folders, one I had missed the first time. It was only 4 sentences long, but I memorized every word. "You never owed anyone your stillness," he had written. "You are allowed to keep moving, even without me." That letter now lived in a frame beside my bed. I started donating again, quietly, without announcement. A local women's shelter, a food bank in the city, a scholarship fund for older adults returning to school. The money Harold left behind wasn't meant to be hoarded, and it certainly wasn't meant to become leverage. It was meant to help someone breathe again. Some days I sat in my small sunroom and wrote letters, real ones on paper. I sent one to Abby. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't forgive or accuse. I simply told her what I had learned, that choosing dignity doesn't require permission. She never replied, and that was okay. Closure isn't a response, it's a release. I took up photography, not the kind on a smartphone, but the kind with an old Nikon I bought from a yard sale. I learned how to adjust the aperture, how to wait for golden hour. I captured still life, a cracked teacup, a robin perched on a fence, a pair of empty boots by my back door. Each photo became proof that ordinary things could still be beautiful after being abandoned. One afternoon, I stood in the garden just after the rain. The soil was dark and fragrant, puddles glinting like glass. The roses were waking up again. I took a picture of a single drop resting on a leaf, suspended, weightless, just before falling. That image won a small contest at the community center. They printed it and hung it on the wall with a tiny brass plate that read, "Balance." I called my sister one morning and asked if she wanted to visit. We hadn't seen each other since the funeral. Her voice cracked when she said yes. She drove in from 2 states over, and we stayed up late talking like girls again, over cocoa and old vinyl records. She asked how I kept going after everything. I told her the truth. I didn't keep going. I paused, and when I came back to myself, the world looked different. We laughed over memories of Harold's terrible omelets and our shared childhood bike. And when she left 2 days later, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't disappear again, Rosie." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and I meant it. One evening, I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. I was never old. I was simply exhausted from being used. I sat with that line for a long time. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. We're taught that aging is about loss, but no one tells you it can also be about reclamation. That growing older can be about pruning the vines that choke us, about blooming, not in spite of what happened, but because of what we finally let go. I wasn't lonely. I was alone by choice, and that choice became my freedom. Every week, I met new faces at the photography club, divorcees, widows, even a man named Peter, who had once been a jazz drummer in New York. We shared stories over coffee and early light. We shared silence, too, the kind that says more than words ever could. One day, a young woman knocked on my door. She introduced herself as a caseworker from a local nonprofit. She'd heard about the donations, wanted to thank me in person. "You don't know how many lives this has touched," she said. I shook my head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just use it well." She smiled. "Do you have family nearby?" I paused. "No," I said. "But I have peace, and that's more than enough." She nodded, almost reverently. As the season shifted, so did the garden. I planted tulips in the spring, sunflowers in the summer. I learned to trim lavender in the fall and protect the roots through winter. Every bloom became a metaphor, every harvest a quiet victory. Some mornings I walked barefoot through the dew. Other mornings I sat in the rocker with a cup of tea and watched squirrels steal from the bird feeder like little bandits. There were no loud moments, no grand declarations, just stillness that no longer felt empty. I had spent so many years in rooms where my name was spoken as inconvenience. Now, I was the only one who got to define it. And that, in the end, was everything. In a shoebox under my bed, I kept a folder labeled Legacy. Inside were letters, instructions, donations planned long after I'm gone, but also a note in my handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I lived exactly how I chose. Don't mourn me with sadness. Mourn me with sunflowers and bread baked from scratch. Mourn me with stories and then tell your own. That's the life I chose. Not perfect, not easy, but entirely mine. One evening, just as the sky turned lavender, I stood beneath the rose trellis I had rebuilt by hand. The air smelled of time and hope. I took a photo without looking through the lens, just clicking by instinct. The image came out blurred at the edges, but full of light. That was enough. That was everything.